and I really just want to share with you some general impressions, some thoughts, some things that are worth knowing, in my opinion, about the genre to which I devoted this book, which is a genre that most Jews are unaware of, and about which, until the book was published, there really was nothing to read about. You could open the Encyclopedia Judaica, where at least today you can find an entry in Rachel of Tzfat from the 16th century. That wasn't, but you still won't find an entry on Ilanot, maybe the 3rd edition. In the meantime, we're gathered here tonight to talk about a genre in its own right of Jewish creativity, Kabbalistic creativity, that emerged in the 14th century and continued and was developed wherever Kabbalists were in the Jewish world for all of the centuries since the 14th century. And in fact, the book has, in something of an epilogue, a kind of homage to people today who are working in a way that I felt could be meaningfully connected to the tradition of this genre. So, and we have here David Friedman, and you all know him, being locals, but David is in the book, so we go from 14th century basically to David. So it's so nice that you're here. It really was, I was so excited also that you agreed to be in the book, and it's very special to have you here. So I thought actually, let me say, I keep saying it's a genre, and let me just clarify what I mean by that. And Kabbalists had, from the very beginnings of Kabbalah, a repertoire of images that they used to visualize primarily the Sfirot and the array of the Sfirot, which is kind of the constitutive idea that makes Kabbalistic thought distinctive in the history of Jewish esotericism. If you look in the very first Kabbalah, or the oldest Kabbalistic manuscripts to have reached us, that were copied, apparently copied in Rome in 1284 and in 1286 from Spanish manuscripts that had arrived not long before on the Italian peninsula. You'll see that in addition to the Kabbalistic treatises, they're miscellanies. They have a number of different compositions that were copied into them. They have a number of diagrammatic images. And one of the fascinating things about those images is that they're independent of the treatises that they appear alongside. They're kind of works, they're diagrammatic images, cosmological images in their own right, meant to be encountered and studied and thought with and contemplated on their own. One of them is actually a fascinating image of a tree that's labeled Ilanot. And actually there's a great video, I shouldn't say, there is a video on YouTube of an evening that David and I did together on Zoom during Corona, where I talk about the Ilanot and he talks about his. We did a kind of shared thing. I won't talk about it tonight because it's not an Ilan. It's not exactly a Kabbalistic tree, which is something that I talk about on the YouTube video. But the point, the larger message that I'm trying to start out with is that Kabbalists of images, as I said. One of them that emerged was used the the schema, the scheme of what was already then known as an arboreal diagram. Just like today we have infographics and we know the names of pie chart, a Venn diagram. So in the 12th century, the arboreal diagram emerged as a very popular infographic, particularly in the sciences, which included at that time philosophy, what they called natural philosophy. And the chain of being, as it was taught among the intellectuals of the 12th and 13th century, was typically visualized as a tree. That tree was called the tree of porphyry, Porphyrian tree, and it visualized the emergence of being. That what, maybe you've heard this idea of the great chain of being, one of the most famous books of treating of intellectual history of the 20th century is Lovejoy's Great Chain of Being. How it was possible to go from abstract substance or mahut, like essence, to a specific person. What was that? How did that chain of being work? So that was visualized with the infographic for the tree of porphyry, which if you look at one, you'll see looks awfully like a Kabbalistic tree. Awfully like a Kabbalistic tree. And the other way the Kabbalists most commonly visualized this sphirot was as nesting circles. Nesting circles. Nesting circles was also a very popular infographic in the 12th and 13th centuries, but not used for the same applications. The arboreal diagram was used in these treatments of the coming into being, but also for genealogical charts and okay, enough said about that. Nesting circles was the preeminent diagram of the astronomers in the Middle Ages. When you saw the circle, your mind was supposed to transform it into a sphere. Two dimension became 3 dimensions, and you understood that this was the fundamental structure of the cosmos. So what the Kabbalists actually did, beginning already in the very early centuries of Kabbalistic creativity, was appropriate the most commonly used infographics of the most prestigious fields of science and make them do the work that they wanted them to do for their own thoughts, their own ideas. I have a theory which that the tree ultimately became the more popular representation of the sphirot because of the chashash of hagshama that was implied by the nesting concentric circles. When you represent the sphirot as circles or spheres, you're at least raising the possibility that what's being represented is actually a structural configuration in space, which could raise the suspicion of corporealizing God, which some people think is a problem. But the Porphyrian tree was never, ever used to represent relations in space. It was only ever used to represent causality and relationality between concepts, like a Venn diagram. If you see a family tree, you don't think that your parents are on top of you. You don't look up and expect to see them because they're on the tree. You understand that that's representing visually some kind of causal process. So I actually think the Kabbalists liked the tree because it had no implication of space. So it was a way of visualizing their picture of the divine without picturing the divine. So that's one of my pet theories. Getting back to the main story, as long as Kabbalists are making Porphyrian diagrams, that's very nice. You can have a little, like a treatise introduction to Kabbalah, and you could say there are 10 sphirot, and you can make a little kishkush in the margins if you want, or you can leave a space on the page and you can make a cute little picture of the 10 sfirot. I'm sure if we look around the Kabbalah Center, we'll find one somewhere. I don't see exactly a little cute 10 sfirot thing, but I'm sure I wouldn't have to go pass through too many rooms to find one. Now, the genre, so you have a diagram called an ilan, and it's exactly the same word, arbor, and that's in Latin. Also, the Porphyrian tree is Ilan porphyrius, also in Hebrew. It's an ilan. It's the name of the schema, of the infographic. That's not the genre. That's just part of the diagrammatic repertoire of the Kabbalists. When, in the 14th century, someone came up with the idea of taking that diagram, blowing it up to fill the space of a parchment sheet, and then leveraging the real estate of that parchment sheet to inscribe in and around the diagrammatic figure information about the Sfirot and about Ein Sof, if it was mentioned, and about the Tzinorot, the channels that network the Sfirotic tree. You have the birth of the genre known also as Ilanot. In the 14th and 15th century, Ilanot were often referred to by Kabbalists as Yeriot, rather than as Ilanot. But really, when you think about it, it's kind of two sides of the same coin. They're both what could be called metonymic names for the genre. One is taken the name for the genre from the medium. The medium is the message, mamash. Like, and you think about it, in the 13th, 14th century, let's say, somebody decides, we're going to do something on cloth, on parchment. We look around the Jewish world and say, where else am I seeing cloth? I'm seeing it in Sefer Torah, mezuzah, tefillin, maybe sometimes kmeot. But every use of parchment by Jews in this period is ritual, it's performative. So the idea that you're going to take the tree and inscribe it on a cloth, the cloth is very important. It says something. And I think it was the understanding of the meaning of the implication of this artifact being a parchment scroll that made it plausible for people to refer to the genre as Yeriot. Sometimes Yeriah is a sheet.
Oh, a sheet.
A sheet. It's funny. This is really an aside, but if you skip to the 16th century, when it became normative to simply refer to Ilanot as Ilanot rather than as Yeriot, and you see references in Kabbalistic works to Ilanot, but these are works written in the 14th, 15th century. When they're writing about Moshe Ra'iti B'Yeri'ah, you'll see, as I saw in a sheet, meaning an ilan, it will almost always be corrected to Yedi'ah. They already didn't know what was being referred to, so they did an autocorrect, from Yeri'ah to Yedi'ah. Even though you read it, that doesn't even make sense.
What's a Yedi'ah?
Yedi'ah, like some knowledge, So it doesn't.
Known.
Huh?
Like a news.
Today it is, but it really doesn't make any sense. But they thought they auto-corrected from Yeri'ah to Yedi'ah. The parchments were circulating already for a couple of hundred years by the time we get to Tzfat in the 16th century, which is, of course, what everybody here either wants to know about or has already heard too much about. But Moshe Cordovero, maybe he was in this apartment, I don't know, in the 16th century, was here, and he was sitting and writing his Pardes Rimonim, and he got to chapter 6, Sha'ar Seder Amidatan Shel Sfirot, and he opens the chapter on the constellation of the Sfirot. I have a whole limud that the Kabbalists also drew much of their vocabulary from astronomical literature, and so a lot of the terms, to be understood properly, you have to see how they were used in astronomical contexts. Because Seder Amidatan is also from as astronomical vocabulary. as is the word ma'arechet and kol minei. So he says that the Mekubalim have a practice of taking the figure of the Ilan and inscribing it on a parchment. This is called, which they call Ilanot. And then he gets into a whole thing of like, how should you really draw this figure? And that chapter is devoted to the figure. But his definition of an Ilan is the arboreal diagram on cloth. It's that wedding of medium and the diagrammatic figure that he defines as Ilanot. Also other Melumadim, other scholars, also in the 16th century, begin listing Ilanot as a separate category of Judaica, if you could call it that. And Christians as well. Guillaume Postel, who was a French legal scholar and Christian Hebraist, who translated most of the Zohar into Latin in the 16th century, also made a list of all of the different categories of Jewish knowledge and literature. And he goes through, he speaks about Tanakh, and he speaks about all different kinds of Sifrut Chazal, the Talmud, the Bavli, the Yerushalmi, the Midrash Rabbah, and he says Ilanoth in Latin. So you see, it was widely understood that there was this genre, and we have hundreds, maybe I don't exaggerate. I don't know how many there were all time.
But you're a Jew, you can exaggerate.
I have to exaggerate. There are enough that have reached us to give us, to allow me to say that Kabbalists, wherever they were producing and using Ilanot. Now, I love being with small groups and not having PowerPoint presentations sometimes. So that's why I came in this old-fashioned professorial way, carrying maps under my arm, the way the professors used to walk to the lecture classes. And so instead of putting this on a big board, over the years, I've made some reproductions that are more or less actual size of a number of Ilanot. Unfortunately, I have relatively few of the Lurianic Ilanot that emerged only roughly in the middle of the 17th century. I have a nice collection of what I refer to as classical Ilanot. Perhaps the earliest to have reached us is this one, on one parchment sheet. It's today held in the Vatican Semitic collection of manuscripts in Rome, in Vatican City, I suppose they would normally say Rome. And it was produced in the middle of the 15th century in Crete. And it does exactly what I just told you Ilanot do. This is again actual size, the arboreal diagram that we expect. It's been inscribed with a text that's drawn from the teachings of Yosef Gikatila, the author of Sha'arei Orah, who also authored, Sha'arei Orah itself is a kind of introduction to the Sfirot. And as I'm sure many of you know, in the early centuries of Kabbalah, the most common genre of Kabbalistic writing was what they called Perushim al Eser Sfirot. Perushim al Eser Sfirot are more like lexicons than real introductions to Kabbalah, because they're organized according to the Sfirot, and they tell you the Shemot ve'kinuyim shel Sfirot. So you get, all the different names and appellations of each of the Sfirot, and there are scores of such books. One of the early Sholem articles is a catalog of Perushim al Eser Sfirot, and he listed well over 100 such compositions from the early centuries of Kabbalah. The emergence of the Ilan as a genre should be understood in light of the popularity of Perushim al Eser Sfirot, and really, it's a bit of a chicken and the egg thing. I don't know. I think it's true to say that there were Perushim al Eser Sfirot before there were Ilanot, but at some point it started getting very reciprocal. And what you see, a Perush al Eser Sfirot, a commentary on the 10 Sfirot that gives you a kind of a dictionary-style entry on each of the 10 Sfirot, can be chopped up, so to speak, cut and pasted, so that if I have information on Chesed or Gvura or whatever, I can actually inscribe it in its proper location on the map, which is meaningful for students, it's meaningful pedagogically, it's meaningful as a memory aid, and it's meaningful as a contemplative, as as whatever, as contemplative content, you might say. There's so much, each one of these Ilanot has a backstory, and to a considerable extent, the fun part for me of writing the book was telling the stories. I'm an historian, I'm not really, I like the stories behind the artifacts, and I as much as the technical Kabbalah that's inscribed upon them. So, like, one of the things that I love about this is that it's folded, not rolled. And if you fold it, I wouldn't do that now at the Vatican. The librarians would get very upset if I began folding it. But you can see all the fold lines. You can see that it folds into an envelope, which is exactly the way people in the Middle Ages sent their letters to one another. They would take a piece of, whatever it was, whatever the medium was, and fold it like our old airmail envelopes, if anyone can still remember.
Yeah, we do.
Aerograms. They're like aerograms on parchment. When you fold this up and you look on the back side of it, you see it actually has a kind of address where the address would go if it was folded up. And it's a dedication to the student for whom it was written by his teacher. And it's very lovely, really. I can get so carried away.
Was that something that you went and found in the Vatican and that's something?
This is a whole. This one was known, like it was meaning that it was cataloged, so you could find it. Can't remember exactly how I came across it the first time, because usually if it's cataloged, it's miscatalogued. I've been to many libraries and found Ilanot on the shelves with Megillot Esther, and they just will write Megillah. They don't know, it's a scroll. They don't really know what it is. I found it in JTS right before they shut the library down for the renovations about 6 years ago. The woman who runs the rare book library invited me into the vault and opened up a drawer and said, "These are uncatalogued manuscripts. Can you identify any of them?" And I found an autograph Ilan made by the Ramchal.
Wow.
And luckily I knew there was one that was known before. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, yeah, they're just. This one that I can show you now is in the library of Brescia in Italy. They don't really have a meaningful collection of Judaica. Somehow this wound up there. It's some paleographers have told me that they believe that it was either written in Spain before the expulsion, or that it was written in Italy around the time of the expulsion by someone who had come from Spain, because the scribe's hand is very Spanish. It has a very similar text to the text that's on the Ilan I showed you a moment ago, but it does have some idiosyncratic features, the centering of Tiferet and all the channels going to Tiferet, and the fact that around Tiferet is this what's called a rota, a circle diagram that is divided into 12 sections that shows the correspondences between the tribes and the 12 permutations of the Shem Havaya and the signs of the zodiac.
What do you mean when you say the scribe's hand is very Spanish?
Well, paleographers are trained to, on the basis of manuscripts that have what are called colophons. Colophon is saying like, I, Yossi, wrote this in Tzfat on Tu Bishvat, this, And so when you have a dated, a manuscript that has a date and a place on it, and you start to know, okay, in the 15th century, Italian scribes used this kind of handwriting.
If it's
In
not
the
forward.
12th century.
If it's not forward.
Yeah, that can happen, of course, it can happen. But, if you go to the great libraries, they don't have a lot of votes. This is not really such a concern. But yeah, you get to know the handwriting of scribes in different times and places, and especially before I would say the year 1500, they're quite accurate because of the melting pot of mobile Jews after the Spanish expulsion. Things get more confused, and I'm of the opinion that once you get to the 16th or 17th century, there were many scribes who could, on demand, copy manuscripts in a Spanish hand or in an Ashkenazi hand, and they did so, for example, in Italy in Moshe Zakut's workshop. For clients who preferred to read manuscripts written in an Ashkenazi handwriting, they would copy the manuscript in an Ashkenazi handwriting, like we choose a font on the computer. So it's much harder to date. It's much harder to place with certainty the provenance of a manuscript the later you go.
The Yemenite ones in your book were very distinctive.
Which ones?
The Yemenite ones.
Yeah, for sure. Nobody would mistake them. Also because the spherotic trees are wearing Yemenite jewelry. I mean, it's crazy. They really are very, very bold in that way. This is also an early one with an amazing backstory. You'll see this on book covers. The Danny Matt Essential Kabbalah in Hebrew uses this image. It's eye candy for everyone. It is, again, nobody knew what this was, but I figured out that it was a copy made in the very early 17th century by a Scottish Christian Hebraist by the name of James Hepburn, who went in Hebrew by the name Yaakov Chevron, who was commissioned by Isaac Kozobon, a French Christian Hebraist, to copy an Ilan that had come to Paris with Caterina de' Medici from the library of the Cardinal Egidio di Viterbo, who was the cardinal in Rome in the 16th century, who collected Kabbalistic manuscripts and had acquired a copy of the 14th century Ilan called the Yiriyah Hagdolah. He had a copy of the Yiriyah Hagdolah from the 14th century, made it all the way to Paris, but this Kozobon said it was too hard for him to read. So he thought that Hepburn, who had been the Semitic librarian at the Vatican and was very expert in reading difficult Hebrew scripts, and was also gifted artistically, he could undertake a project to recreate this Ilan, which is today in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. And it's kind of amazing, and also you look at it and you go, is this Jewish? Is it not Jewish? What is this? And nobody could make heads or tails of the text. And I figured it's the text of this that is associated with the Yiriyah Gdolah. But for a long time, I just thought, in the book actually, I even write, I have a sense that a lot of this is James Hepburn's embellishments, and that the 14th century manuscript did not look like this. Couldn't have, just didn't seem likely to me. And only a few months ago, after the book had already come out, I was contacted by a librarian in Uppsala. You can believe in Uppsala, in Sweden. Yeah, Sweden, right? That's where Uppsala is. And he said, I have this
spot of Sweden.
The spot, yeah, of course. He says, I have this thing here, and somebody told me I should ask you what it is. He sends me a beautiful image, they did it right. I guess they made a beautiful reproduction of an Ilan in the family of the Ilan I'm going to show you next. And at the bottom of the Ilan, there were two other Ilanot, as if on their own in separate frames. And I zoomed in on the bottom one, and the bottom line is, within a few minutes, I understood that I was looking at an authentic copy of that Yiriyah Gdolah that wasn't from the 14th century, mind you. It was copied maybe in the 16th century when there were still authentic Yiriyot Gdolot in circulation. So I now know what the original one looked like. So it's like, if I could have another shot at the book, I would not have to speculate as much. But that will be.
When did they start using color like that?
Well, they didn't. This is a Christian thing. It's very unusual. The extent of color here is unusual. By the way, just a little thing, just so you notice, there is this motif, which I'm going to show you again on the next Ilan, of the throne of glory, and a representation of the Rakia, and a representation of the Chayot HaKodesh. So this kind of Ezekiel 1 vision of the Merkava and the Kruvim, the Rakia, the Kisei, Ume'ala Kisei, not Kidmut Adam, but the spiratic tree is basically parked or nested on the throne of glory. Now, I just said, so the color here is really over the top, and it's been decorated in a way that we associate more with Christian manuscripts than certainly with Jewish Kabbalistic manuscripts. But here I really need Vanna White for a second. This is also a manuscript.
But isn't Ilan Gematria Adam?
Ilan is Gematria
No.
Ha-Adam, maybe, no? What is it? Wait,
Ilan
what is it?
אילן זה 91.
But it is a gematria of something, right? What is the gematria again?
It's X with Aleph.
Amen.
Now I was thinking of
91. שני השמות.
yeah, but it is like the yichud of yeah. This is a manuscript. This is a copy of a manuscript that is today in, like the last one you've just seen, in Oxford's collection. I call it the family of manuscripts to which this belongs. I call the magnificent parchment. This is again more or less actual size, and
Wow.
this is a 33,000 word anthology of Kabbalistic texts that were the texts found in the libraries of Italian Kabbalists around the year 1500. And the creator of this family of manuscripts was basically inspired to create a summa, kind of the ultimate uber Ilan, the super Ilan of all time. And he integrated many earlier Ilanot in his Ilan, and he even took other Kabbalistic diagrams that were in circulation at the time. There's a Kabbalistic work that a lot of them are anonymous, but I tend to give things names. So this one I call it the Kuntras HaTzurot HaKabbaliyot, the booklet of Kabbalistic forms that was in circulation at that time in Italy. And a lot of the secondary diagrams in the magnificent parchment are taken from there. But here, let me think what I can do to just give you maybe if I can do this without breaking my neck, and where I can do the twist also now. So, I mean, here in a way a PowerPoint would be fun because I could zoom in for you better, but I will tell you, if you go to ilanot.org, which is still an internal site for my project, this whole thing can be studied, and you can zoom in anywhere. It is all transcribed and translated into English. All 33,000 words. 33,000. So you have like Ein Sof as the eye, top Keter. You have the Keter Chokhmah Binah in alignment in the center, which is typical of Italian Kabbalists in this period. Before Cordovero here in Sfat said, cut it out, just make it a triangle. You get all of the Sfirot are inscribed with the names and appellations of the Sfirot. In that sense, it's very it's very much in the tradition of the Ilanot that it has just ingested and perfected. It has a point of view, which is also kind of cool. This is not a random selection of Kabbalistic texts. There is a point of view, a principle of selection. For example, the man responsible for this was very much in a kind of philosophical school of Italian Kabbalah, and wanted to make sure that people knew that they were not looking at a picture of God when they looked at this. This is he's a nominalist. He's not a realist. He's saying this is even, let's see, down here he has some inscriptions to that effect. But in general, the idea is that that it should be clear to you that what you're looking at is not an image of what God looks like if you could take a picture. And this is, that maybe sounds silly, but there is a kind of inclination to regard the tree of the Sfirot as having some kind of ontological reality, that there really is a right way of drawing the tree of the Sfirot, because it should correspond iconically to some actual structure of the Gadol. Some Kabbalists are more comfortable with that idea, and others are really uncomfortable with that idea. He was uncomfortable with that idea. Another expression of that is his willingness on one Ilan to use multiple visualizations of the Sfirot, which is an implicit statement saying we can visualize this in a lot of different ways. There isn't just one way to visualize the nature of the divine in Kabbalistic terms.
I love the keta with the Arbash Nechnusu Lepardes.
So I'm getting there. You can see from the way I'm like very slowly moving here down to Malchut. Malchut is sitting on a very nice Renaissance throne chair that's inscribed Dmut Kisei. So again, that parking of Malchut in the throne of glory, which is sitting atop the Rakia, the firmament, which is sitting atop an image in which you can see the Shor, the Nesher, the Aryeh, and the Adam, the four different primary Chayot HaKodesh. And among the Chayot HaKodesh here is Rabbi Akiva, a very rare picture, you might say, of Rabbi Akiva, who has reached there from here. By the way, I should, maybe before even saying this, I should say the bottom third of this Ilan is devoted to a zodiac. This is, again, a rota, divided into 12 sectors, as you'd expect from a zodiac, with the iconographic representations of each of the mazalot, each of the signs of the zodiac, and some astrological content. It's I would say with an orientation towards divination rather than, you can't use this if you're trying to read someone's chart or something, but a kind of divinatory astrology. But I think the main takeaway is that this is the created cosmos, and it does represent the four elements in the sublunar sphere and the various galgalim, the various planetary orbs, spheres, the spheres of heaven, not the spherot, until you get to the galgal of the kochavim and the galgal of the intellect, of the schalim, and beyond even the sechel, the highest realm that would be recognized by the natural philosophers, you have the Chayot HaKodesh, and Rabbi Akiva is there, and he's reached there after having gone into the Pardes, which is depicted here at 9 o'clock on the zodiac. All four of the Tanaim are depicted here, and then you have the angel, the Katriel, carrying the Keter Malchut through the Echalot,
I'm not a photographer, as we
followed
say.
by Rabbi Akiva, who reaches finally to gaze upon the Kisei and maybe above from this vantage point. And at least in one of the texts here also that goes into the story, not original, but borrowed by the creator of this Ilan, says, "Be like Rabbi Akiva." And so one possible reading of that is that the Ilan maker wanted all of us who engage with this artifact to take it as a kind of inspirational challenge to take this journey, just like Rabbi Akiva took his journey, and work our way up the ladder, as it were. אז אני לא חושב שהזכרתי, אבל כנראה אי שם בסוף המאה ה-15 או ממש בתחילת המאה ה-16.
איפה?
העותק, כולם מאיטליה. You can see that there's a very strong Italian presence in this era of Ilanot from the 14th to the 16th centuries. And we have about a dozen of these that have survived, and they're in mostly in library collections, not in private collections.
In Italy?
I'm trying to think if there are any still in Italy. There is a fragment in Rome, in the collection of the Jewish community of Rome, and there is a beautiful one in the Vatican, beautiful with gold leaf and beautiful colors. And there's also correspondence. It's very similar to this. They're all copies of some. I don't know. It's possible. A very formidable collection of Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. They have an amazing collection of manuscripts. That's the Reformed Rabbinical School in Cincinnati, if anybody doesn't know that. And speaking of the Vatican, again, a lot of the manuscripts in the Vatican, Hebrew manuscripts, are there because there were so many officials or clerics in the church who were interested in Jewish culture. They're not all there because they killed Jews and took away our manuscripts. I think a lot of Jewish people think that they get very upset when they hear that I've gone to the Vatican, they took those from us. The fact is they only survived because they were taken care of by Vatican librarians for 500 years. Had they been in Jewish hands, it would have been beautiful also, but they would have been used and abused, and they wouldn't have reached us. So thanks to the interest of Christian Hebraists, we have much more than we would have had otherwise. They really saved the day in many cases. Okay. So I did show you that. Maybe just one last thing from that period. An incredible Ilan, which I really should be able to show you both sides of. There was also, we're talking about this 1530s in Venice. There was a physician Kabbalist named Khalfan, and also a much more elderly rabbi who'd been a devotee of Shlomo Molchos, named this Khalfan, who was a very affluent physician and scholar, and he decided to offer his host as a gift, the gift of an Ilan that they would make together. And this is the front side of that Ilan. This Ilan has survived because it's been preserved in the Medici Library of Florence. It has the larger Ilan above, a smaller Ilan below, and one of the coolest things about it is, I wish I had a way of showing you now, but you can see it on that same website, ilanot.org. If you flip this on to show the back side, they've exactly in the same place on the parchment on the back side, they've made an Ilan of the Sitra Achra. So it's the real deal. Like the front side is the good side and the back side is the bad side. And Mamash Zelu Madzel, they really went for it. So
How is the Sitra Achra different?
I mean, I don't have the back side here because it's just gray on the back. But you can see it on my website, ilanot.org.
How are they different?
How or what
The
different?
Sitra Achra.
Oh, well, like the names of the Sfirot are different. They're like Lilith, Ashmedai. I don't know if I shouldn't say. All the names that we shouldn't say unless we want unwanted
It's
visitors.
just like mirroring the
Yeah,
good side.
yeah, exactly. Like instead of Shechina and Malchut, they'll say Lilith. So the anti. It's really, really fascinating. How much time do I have? What should I do?
As much as you want.
That's
What is really artistically.
Lots of
done.
The
wine.
Hammerschlag? Which one?
The last one you showed us.
Oh, great. Oh, yes. That one has real illuminations. I think that it's likely that at some point they brought in an external manuscript illuminator because there are scenes from the Garden of Eden, and you see Samael and Lilith as a kind of like dragon. Chalfan and Shorfati's own hands. They each wrote sort of dedications to the other on the backside of the manuscript to tell the story of how they made the Ilan together. And it's really sweet and beautiful. So you've now seen really Al Regel Achat, a sweeping panorama of the genre in its first centuries. And as you know, probably better than any general audience I've ever spoken to, in the 16th century here in Tzfat, we have a kind of transition from Newtonian physics to Einsteinian physics. So we went from, one doesn't cancel the other, but from the classical Kabbalah to Lurianic Kabbalah, we really have a kind of quantum leap in the complexity, sophistication of Kabbalistic theosophy, if you want to call it that, cosmology. And I guess I have to say at least a few words about Tzfat Kabbalah, Lurianic Kabbalah, and its Ilanot, its impact on the genre. So first of all, I would point out something that I think is really meaningful. I said before that in the very first Kabbalistic manuscripts to be written that have reached us, you have independent diagrams that speak for themselves and that demand to be studied as such. In the first, the mothership of Lurianic Kabbalistic manuscripts, you have something that could well be compared to just that. And I'm referring to the autograph copy. When a manuscript person says autograph, they mean a book written by hand by the author who wrote the book. That's what an autograph manuscript is. The author's personal copy. Like when they found the Rambam's Mishneh Torah in the Geniza of Kahir, they said that's autograph Mishneh Torah. It's his handwriting, the Rambam's handwriting. So we have, it's not, unfortunately not accessible to people because it's in a private collection today, but Chaim Vital, again, I don't even, it's so weird to talk to people in Tzfat, but you must know everything, but you know that the Ari was here more or less from 1570 to 1572. He didn't really teach publicly until the Ramak Cordovero's death in 1570. And he had maybe less than 2 years of teaching before his own death in the plague that hit Tzfat in 1572. And during that time, he had a number of students, and among them, Chaim Vital was the kind of dominant figure. And when the Ari died, Chaim Vital had already started taking some notes from the classes that he attended, taught by his master. But basically, Chaim Vital began a Sisyphean project of making these things that he had learned from the Ari into what we can now call Kabbalah Ari. If you go to the store, probably the Chanut Sifrei Kodesh in Tzfat, and you see Kol Kitvei Ari, you'll find out.
Makolet sells it.
Yeah, Makolet sells it here. But you won't see any of the Ari's writing there. He only wrote a Perush to Sifrei Tzniut, the Idra Rabbah, and Zmirot for Shabbat. But all of that Kitvei Ari is really, most of it is Vital, not the Ari's writing. And it's a fascinating story, but you have Avivi here. So Avivi, 3 books, each one is the size of my book, tells the story of the emergence of Lurianic literature, the bibliography. The story of the Lurianic bibliography is as complicated as Lurianic Kabbalah. I think that's fair. If anybody looks at Avivi, you'll get dizzy in a few minutes. One reason is because Vital never felt like he quite got it right, so he kept writing and rewriting and even went to such length as to bury much of his writing in the cemetery There's some arguments about which cemetery, but I think probably the cemetery in Jerusalem is the right one. Buried manuscripts there. And the only manuscript that he didn't bury, other than some more brief treatises that he composed and that were famously copied during an episode of his illness in Tzfat by 100 scribes, according to the story, was his manuscript, autographed manuscript, of which he called Etz Chaim. Etz Chaim, the tree of Chaim, the tree of life.
How did they know he buried these things?
Because they were disinterred. First of all, because he was like Kafka telling Max Brod to burn his manuscripts. He saw to it that they were buried. It was known that they were, I guess it was at least known by some people where to look for them. And in the 1530s, 1540s probably, early 1540s, 60s, we're switching. 1640, roughly, these disinterred manuscripts were taken to a rabbi who then had a Beit Midrash in Yerushalayim by the name of Yaakov Tzemach. Tzemach had been a physician, a converso physician in Portugal, left Portugal in his 30s, began studying Torah in a very short time, like he must have had, I don't know, the Sar HaTorah helping him out. He became one of the greatest Talmidei Chachamim of his generation. Went from Salonika, where he first started studying Torah as an adult. A few years later, he was already in Tzfat collecting the fragmentary Kabbalistic manuscripts that he was able to find here at that time in the 1530s. Then he went to Damascus to try and see the autographed copy of Etz Chaim, which was in the possession of Chaim Vital's son, Shmuel Vital. And then he came to Yerushalayim, where he had this Beit Midrash, which was also a scriptorium, where he copied and basically sold Lurianic manuscripts.
In the book, you said that he also went to Chaim Vital's classes in Damascus.
He went to Shmuel Vital's classes, and Shmuel, during Shalosh Shudas, Sudash Lishit, for a number of years, he would read aloud from the autographed copy on Shabbat, because he didn't want anyone to copy the manuscript. But what he didn't know was that Yaakov Tzemach was a genius, and he remembered everything, and he would go home, and after Shabbat, he would write down everything that had been read aloud during Sudash Lishit. So there was actually, thank you, David, there's like a few periods in Tzemach's life of, first coming to Tzfat and getting what he could here, then going to Damascus and doing this whole memory arts trick.
He buried the text because he wasn't sure of what he was.
Vital was, he kept feeling like he didn't get it right because, the Ari was, if you asked the Ari about Lurianic Kabbalah, he would say, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no such thing as Lurianic Kabbalah.
Okay.
And you say, what are you up to? He would say, I'm a student of the Zohar. I just study Zohar all the time. So what do you teach about? Well, I just teach I just teach about what it says in the Zohar, in the Sifra Tzniuta, and the Durabah, the Drezuta. So I think the Ari would show up with his students and, read some Zohar and then say what he saw there. And there was, from all the accounts, including Shmuel Vital, including Chaim Vital, but also reiterated even by Meir Koppers, who I didn't get to just yet, but I'll hopefully have a chance to get to him in a few minutes. Generations of redactors and editors of this Lurianic literature said the Ari was a balaganist. A balaganist would come to give a shiur, and it was whatever came out. I remember Shlomo, he's staying out with a guy named Shlomo. Some of you know him. And he would say, when it says in the Zohar, patach, it means that they didn't know when they started talking, what they were going to say. It says that patach ve'amar means that they started talking, and what came out, came out.
So all those texts that were buried because they were misused?
No. Chaim Vital felt like they weren't right. Just like Kafka wanted Max Brod to burn his manuscript. He didn't feel they were right. They weren't good. They weren't good enough. You imagine, what I'm trying to say is, someone like Vital had to take this amorphous body of inspired teachings that had no beginning and no end, and no before and no after,
There's no
and create no syllabus, but he had to create a systematic body of literature so that it could be preserved and transformed and made in a way kind of universal. Also, there's another thing about the Ari that we know, in addition to this balaganist or inspired approach to teaching, his engagements with students and people in this community were extremely personal. So a lot of what he said was individual. Like, he was talking to you and telling you what you needed to do. You needed to do this yichud. You needed to go to that kever and do the prostration there and with this yichud. And it's like personal, individual prescription.
Chaim Vital, in his dream diary, Sefer Chazionot, he's not totally sure about what happened with the Ari said to him.
He has a lot of sveikot also. And
He doesn't have a lot of
and how could he not?
self-confidence in
What do you mean? What do you mean?
He says many times, not just in Sefer Chazionot, in Etz Chaim, he says, "Yesh li b'binyan is a safek." I don't know.
That he didn't know what he was talking about. He
So
didn't know he was remembering.
sometimes he didn't remember. Sometimes he felt like maybe there was a
Because once he
contradiction
had to
between
make order
different
of
things that he
something,
heard.
it's
And
your
he just,
interpretation.
sometimes there'd be like in Luriana Kabbalah, there's something called hitlabshuyot, like in garmentations, the interlocking of higher partsufim, higher divine personalities and their lower analogs. And it's quite mathematical most of the time, but not all of the time. There isn't like one algorithm you can just fire up and it will give you like tick, 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 and you see how it works. There are anomalous patterns and mechanisms. And about these, Chaim Vital would just say, I just don't really know. I'm not sure how this works out. I just don't know. But it's very much like in the history of medicine. Most medical textbooks were written by someone who was a physician for years and years and years and had notebooks of all of the patients that came with all of their complaints and all of the treatments that they tried, and then if they worked or if they didn't work. And then towards the end of their medical career, they would try and synthesize something coherent from all of these cases. And so it was quite a similar thing to try and distill from the Ari's individual prescriptions, his teachings and his treatments and his analysis of people, looking at your forehead, thinking about all of your gilgulim and telling you what was your tikkun and what the birds had just told him a second before about you. These were all things that you needed to then extrapolate and create a coherent system out of. And Vital found it extremely difficult and was never entirely satisfied with the product of his labor. So he has Vivi speaks about it, Mahadura Kama, Mahadura Patra, there's sometimes a middle Mahadura also. He tried and he tried again. But what I wanted to say, apropos Erev Ilanot, is that in the autograph of Etz Chaim, as seen in Damascus by Meir Papers, he's the one who brings the evidence, the testimony, the edut. He says, I went to Damascus, I opened the volume, and I saw a daf metzuyar. He sometimes calls it the daf hatziyur. But the Etz Chaim opens with a tziyur, a daf meaning an entire dedicated page, almost certainly a fold-out page, as was commonly used in these kinds of manuscripts. So Vital himself thought, first thing that a student should encounter or a reader should encounter when they open Etz Chaim is some kind of very complex, oversized chart, diagram of this cosmological system that I will dive into now in the text that follows.
So in this one manuscript, it's in a private collection.
It's a private collection.
Anyway,
Avivi has seen it.
Yeah. I saw some facsimiles, some photographs of it. But I want to ask, so there is this...
The Daf Tziyur did not survive. Almost every sewn-in, oversized page in an old manuscript is lost. Like, it's very rare to find an old manuscript that still has these fold-out pages because of the wear and tear, and also people just intentionally ripping them out, maybe for good reasons. They want to sit and study them, and they don't want them attached to the book anymore. But they're the first things to go. So that I mentioned primarily to say that visualizing Lurianic Kabbalah graphically is on the ground floor of Lurianic Kabbalah. It's not that later Lurianic Kabbalists thought, we really need to make some diagrams, but the thinking visually and graphically realizing that visual thinking is part of Lurianic Kabbalah from its inception. If you go through the great transmitters of this tradition, so the transmission is really Chaim Vital, Yaakov Tzemach, Meir Poppers. They're the three. Chaim Vital writes most of the material. Tzemach, whose story I've kind of given you like some fragmentary sense of, is the one who's charged with, in addition to the library he created through spending all of the money he brought from Portugal on manuscripts. When he reached Tzfat, he had brought with him gems and gold, and he says he spent it all to acquire any Lurianic manuscripts that were still in circulation in Tzfat when he arrived here in the 1630s. Then he went to Damascus and made those memory books from the Shalashodas. And then he came to Jerusalem, and they started bringing him these moldy, wormy, stinking, decomposing manuscripts. And because he was a good Portuguese humanist who'd been given a proper university education and had a very solid antiquarian appreciation for authenticity, he decided not to make a salat. He said, it's my mission to take all of these scraps and decomposing pieces and reassemble what were the original treatises of Chaim Vital. I'm not just going to make a patchwork quilt of whatever I can. I'm going to figure out what goes with what, because only one book from the Geniza arrived more or less intact in his hands in Jerusalem, of the book Utzrot Chaim, which he says only was missing its cover page. So he had to name it. He didn't know what Vital called it. So he named it Utzrot Chaim, the treasures of Chaim. And that book actually, it's a bit sad really. The Utzrot Chaim had some success. It's still today in print, and it was beloved in some Kabbalistic circles. Moshe Zakut, for example, thought very highly of it and encouraged people to study it. But after the incredible effort that Tzemach made to recreate the authentic library of Chaim Vital's writings, his student, Meir Poppers, who was an itinerant Kabbalist who went back and forth between Krakow and Yerushalayim, decided that Lurianic Kabbalah was impenetrable. He even writes in his introduction to his version of Etz Chaim, which is the one you'll find if you go to a bookstore today and say, I'd like a copy of Etz Chaim, please. They'll give you the Meir Poppers edition. He writes in the beginning, I had to create a new version of Etz Chaim because students trying to learn Kabbalah Ta'ari, Ratzu Lasim Ketz L'chayehem. A lot of the Lurianic Kabbalists say you want to learn Kabbalah Ta'ari, okay, you read the book once, you won't understand anything. You read it twice, maybe the second time, some things fall in. You have to have such perseverance.
But I think Utzrot Chaim is still the best.
For that, which is why Zakut said
exactly to start to learn.
It is the best for that exactly, which is why Zakut recommended it. Yeah, you can get through it. You have a chance. You have a fighting chance. You can read it. It's not such a long book that you won't understand the whole, as you read it the first time at all. What I want to say about Ilanot is this. So Meir Poppers, Tzemach is the man who, in addition to those restoration projects that he took upon himself, also took Kabbalistic pedagogy very seriously, and he was into making large format charts. He made a large chart of the Kavanot, so that people davening could have a chart that could not just be in a little siddur where they have to read tiny letters, but it should be a big chart on the wall with the Kavanot, and then they could just look at that and have the Kavanot at Tefillah. I think he said specifically he did it for Kavanat Shema. He didn't do it for the whole siddur, but he had something there. He writes about it in the introduction to Tiferet Adam. But he also made an Ilan HaPartzufim. So he felt it was very important for people to understand better how the system of Hitlapshut works, that enrobings of the Partzufim or divine personalities from Arich Anpin into, basic through Abba Ve'ima and their connections to Ze'er Anpin, and how these interlocking Partzufim, how that actually works. You might even maybe say mechanistically speaking. How do the pieces fit together, and to be able to visualize them in a map-like manner with the ultimate clarity. Here's where things fall apart a little bit in my presentation because I don't have great pictures of that to show you, but I can a little bit. This piece of a much larger Ilan represents Tzemach's contribution to Ilanot. It's really the first Lurianic Ilan, also the first Lurianic Ilan, if you don't count that opening diagram of Vital's, which I have a pretty good idea what it must have looked like, and it didn't look like this. But he uses the arboreal diagram. Each one of the Partzufim is a Kabbalistic tree, albeit with 11 rather than 10 hubs because of the need for da'at in the Hitlapshut process. And the heads of each Partzuf are hierarchical. They're, the head of Arich Anpin is above the heads of Abba Ve'ima, which are above the heads of the Partzufim below them, and so forth. But they all reach the karka of Olam HaAtzilut, as the ground of the world of emanation, as is inscribed at the bottom of his Ilan. So he created this Ilan HaPartzufim to give students a bird's eye view with crystal clarity of the most basic mechanism of Hitlapshut, as taught in Vital's writings.
He innovated a graphic way that wasn't used until his time.
Absolutely.
That's what I got from your book.
Yes.
What's different about
Poppers,
this?
and then Poppers had a different way.
Exactly.
Well, what's different about that that's innovative?
I mean, nobody had tried to diagram the interlocking Partzufim before. It was clear from the text that the Partzufim should be imagined as comprised of sfirot. So,
And like having them on the side and having the
Yes.
lines.
the horizontal connections that show the engagements of the higher sfirot with their lower, or the higher Partzufim. The lower sfirot of the higher Partzufim are linked to the higher sfirot of the lower Partzufim. And you can see that all very clearly, but it's far from being even attempting to be a kind of exhaustive visualization of Lurianic, the whole Lurianic emanatory scheme. It's very schematic, but it's not very rich in terms of its, or let's say its granularity isn't very high. Its resolution isn't very high.
On the scale from, when was this, like 17th century, 18th century?
He did this around 1640.
Fine, so from 1640 until 2024, when you have what's called
David.
Friedmanic
Yeah.
art.
Yes.
Was there development?
Yes.
That's all in your book.
Yeah, of course it is.
For sale.
But like what I want, I just, what you have is, this is what I didn't quite get to the punchline when I said, oh, this is a bit sad. I don't know if you remember a few minutes ago, I kind of sighed, but I didn't tell you what I was sad about. And I was sad that after all of that work that Tzemach did to create such incredible restorations of authentic treatises written by Vital, with all good intentions, his student Popper said, we don't need authenticity and integrity of individual compositions. We need to create a kind of an anthology that will, a thematic anthology that takes bits and pieces from wherever they happen to be in the entire Lurianic library and presents them in a continuous, coherent flow that can be understood by a normal person, or not so normal, but somewhat normal person. So Poppers basically took everything that Tzemach did and chopped it up, put it on the floor, and reassembled it to create his Etz Chaim, which has an entirely new system of organizing the material, and the material is just taken from wherever he found lines of relevance. Why is that sad? It's also sad. It's sad because very soon after doing that work, which he did just a decade or so after Tzemach had finished this incredible project, the Poppers edition became recognized as the kind of canonical expression of Lurianic Kabbalah. So nobody really ever looked back, with the exception of Otzrot Chaim in some circles that was studied. People really went with Etz Chaim, and Etz Chaim was ultimately the first book of the Italian Lurianic Kabbalah to be printed in Koretz in the 18th century. And today also, like you go to the bookstore, that's what you'll see. Etz Chaim is the Poppers Etz Chaim. Now, thanks to the people in Yerushalayim at, what do they call themselves? Ahavat Shalom. You have a whole library. They're very serious about Tzemach. They love Tzemach, and they're putting out Tzemach. But this is a very recent thing that you can get. You can get Tzemach's editions of Italian literature.
Before Tzemach, there were no Partsufim in Ilanot.
Well, Vital's diagram certainly would have included labels of the Partsufim, but it was like lots and lots of circles with or Makif or Pnimi, and the Igulim of Arich, and the Igulim of Atik, the Igulim of Abba, the Igulim of Ima, and then a line of Yoshir going through it as a kind of Igulim Yoshir on steroids.
So where is it?
It's in the book.
You can see
The Vital before Tzemach?
Oh, the original one from his autograph copy is missing. But I believe from the descriptions also of Poppers who saw it, that in early manuscripts of Mavo She'arim, those are there. That also Tzemach had copied very carefully, and Tzemach also, Tzemach even suggested emendations to Vital's diagram, but he was such a serious scholar, and antiquarian of integrity, that he had two in the if he wanted to make a change, he copied first Vital's diagram, and then he said, here is my suggestion for a possibly clearer presentation of the very same material. But he never would intervene and corrupt something that he was copying. He had a great scholarly integrity. The book is probably 2/3 about Lurianic Ilanot and 1/3 about classical Ilanot. But thanks to the fact that I have all these nice pictures, I ended up skewing it very much in favor of the classical Ilan tonight. But I do have one Lurianic Ilan that's bad. It's bad. It's bad. I don't know if I can show it.
How bad can it be?
Don't tell your rabbi that you saw this, okay? You get in trouble.
Guard your eyes.
Well, this is the bottom of the Ilan. This is the bottom of the Ilan. Yeah. The way this Ilan works is at a certain point, here basically, basically here you have frames that work like this. As this goes here, and then it goes to here, and then to here, and then to here, and then to here, 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 here. This is the colophon of the author named Nosson Netta Hammerschlag, a nice Moravian Jew who did this in 1677. But now, well, I'm still holding this part. I should just say one thing.
Yeah.
The poppers not only kind of ruined Tzemach's hard work by making that salat called Etz Chaim, but he also thought that Ilanot should be much richer in content. And why start with Arich Anpin if you could start with Adam Kadmon? So this really is kind of audacious, you have to say. He began his Ilan with the head of Adam Kadmon. One of the most beautiful manuscripts preserving this Adam Kadmon head atop the Popper's manuscript is in the Lubavitch Library in New York in 770. That's a whole story. That's also in the book.
That's the Piper, the Popper one?
Mayor Poppers begins with the head of Adam Kadmon, showing the brains, the mochin of Adam Kadmon, and the oznaim, the nechiraim, the af, ainaim, apez, zakan, and you have a whole image of the head of Adam Kadmon. It's very important for the beginning of the Lurianic description of the emergence of Atzilut, basically, even of the highest partsufim that emerge from the lights that come out of the forehead of Adam Kadmon and the ears and the eyes and the nostrils and the mouth. They're all emitting different kinds of lights, and Poppers thought, this is where the story begins, this is what I'm going to show. So you have quite an audacious thing. You have actual faces of Adam Kadmon atop the Poppers Ilan. So you have to first get used to that kind of anthropomorphism. It's a little weird sometimes for Jews to see pictures of God's face. But and Adam Kadmon is about as close to, you can't make a picture of Ein Sof's face. That doesn't make any sense. But if there is a kind of personal God of Kabbalah, or the first expression of the divine that might be associated with what we might call a personal God, could be Adam Kadmon. Even though you could also say that any of the Partsufim have, at least Zer Anpin is the more typical one that you say, well, Zer Anpin might be the expression of God that reminds us most of the biblical God. We'll say, I like that, I don't like that. That's good, that's bad. That's Zer Anpin. Arich Anpin is like, everything is cool, I'm chill, whatever. So, there's a whole thing like, let's maybe upgrade our God concept from Zer Anpin to Arich Anpin and just let everybody live in peace and harmony and love. That's maybe a Kabbalistic lesson for today. But in 1677, this Moravian Kabbalist and Chazan makes this Ilan with this head of Adam Kadmon. What's the best way to see it with the lighting? I don't know. Is this good enough?
Yeah.
Good enough is good enough. I don't know how hard it is for you to see based on how close you are, but you have here a crown, which is quite typical in the representations of the head of Adam Kadmon on the Poppers Ilan. And by the way, very recently I discovered a standard Poppers Ilan that was copied by Hammerschlag before he made this. It came up for auction, and I found it on auction and said, oh my God, I recognize this. This is Hammerschlag's handwriting, and I called my dear friend, the collector, Bill Gross, and he bid for it. He won it on auction. It's in the book also. But so on the one hand, it's standard, but what's not standard about it is a good Habsburgian subject. I'm also an Austrian citizen. My father was raised in Vienna. I immediately recognized this as the Habsburg crown made for Rudolph II. And you can go to see the crown jewels of the Habsburg emperors. Of course, you know this is only the Habsburg have this kind of crown.
And the mustache.
Now, and of course, you know Habsburg from the mustache. Who doesn't have a nice mustache like this if you're a Habsburg? You have to have it. So you have really a Habsburg emperor as Adam Kadmon, with the eyes and the nose and the Habsburg mustache, the mouth. This is a tongue sticking out.
Oh,
And
God.
a codex preparatory study that Hammerschlag made before committing his work to an expensive parchment. And that codex is now at the Bodleian in Oxford as well. It's actually a pop-up tongue. He glued on a tongue, and so that he can inscribe the tongue, but then you can flip it up and read what was on the lower lip of Adam Kadmon. So this guy was a piece of work.
Oh, yeah. That's what it sounds like.
Now, it took me a moment to figure it out, more than a moment, but at some point I thought, okay, this is obviously a Habsburg, but is it a specific Habsburg? So I thought, who was the emperor of the Habsburg? Who was the Habsburg emperor when Hammerschlag made the Ilan? I looked it up. Leopold I.
What year?
1677. It was Leopold I. He was the Habsburg emperor for like 50 years or something. And not always so good to the Jews, but it's well attested, despite some of his indiscretions towards our people, Jews loved him. All Jews loved the Habsburgs always, no matter what they did. We just love the Habsburgs. So I in fact, like one of my oldest possessions, the inheritance, is I have a Kaiser Franz Josef ivory letter opener from my grandfather from Vienna. The bust of the Kaiser at the end of the letter opener. So I looked up the emperor. I said, well, what can I see? Can I see an engraving on Google Images? Let's see some engravings of Kaiser Leopold I. I looked at it. It's this. It's the famous engraving of Leopold I was his model, his study for this. But there was another model that he had in mind, and if it's not obvious from the image, it became obvious when I started studying the text, and that is Shabtai Tzvi. Because this was a man who, in 1666, fell deeply, deeply in love with Shabtai Tzvi. And although written 11 years after Shabtai Tzvi's apostasy, and a year or so after his death, and he is still enraptured by Shabtai Tzvi, and much of the Ilan and critical pieces shows evidence of his deep connection to Shabtai Tzvi and to some fundamental ideas of the Sabbatean take on Lurianic Kabbalah. For example, the prioritizing of Tiferet over Ein Sof. The idea that Ein Sof really is ultimately religiously irrelevant. And so what's really the true and highest God is Kosh Baruch Hu, our God, that we have a real relationship with. What do we care if there's an Ein Sof God? Ein Sof God doesn't care about us, we shouldn't care about him. That's a very Sabbatian idea. Also the idea of that there's Or Sheyesh Bo Machshava and Or She'ein Bo Machshava. The light of Ein Sof that had a thought, let's do some creation, and then there's a whole part of Ein Sof that wasn't so much involved. Or She'ein Bo Machshava. And all of the deepest things will ever happen, like the Mashiach, the soul of the Mashiach come from the Or She'ein Bo Machshava. It's very deep actually, and you should know
That a lot of people here probably like, but I saw that in Sha'arei Gan Eden. So a lot of Sabbatian writings in the late 17th century were copied into manuscripts without attribution, and sometimes they were even ascribed to the Ari himself. And they entered all kinds of literature. The Baal Shem Tov's favorite book is Sha'arei Gan Eden. It's full of Natana Azati's original writings. So tons of stuff got into Hasidut. And Chemdat Yamim.
So this is a bad spin-off. This is a bad.
It's not bad. I was kidding about
No,
that.
yeah, but because it's more.
It's Sabbati.
Because of Shabtai Tzvi, not.
It's Shabtai. This is an Ilan.
So it's less acceptable. Like people wouldn't.
I was going to say, don't tell your rabbi that seems Shabtai.
This is the false tree.
It's look, אין בזה הרבה חידושים ממש, אבל it's amazing. It's very detailed. I think it's an astounding piece of work, and fascinating to study. It is both authentic in a way to its sources, but he is not afraid to make interpolations where he wants to. Like he even has some fake references to Otzrot Chaim in here. And you look and they're not in Otzrot Chaim. When he wants to say a Torah, and he doesn't want you to be suspicious of the Torah, he says, as it says, he'll even give like a page number. He'll say, like it says in Daf Ve'amud Kaf V'Kaf and Otzrot Chaim, and he look, what do you mean Daf? Like we all using the same manuscript? It's not like it was standardized. But it's nowhere. And he's having some fun. He's being a little bit subversive, putting in fake references.
Were all of these Ilanot copied by hand in scriptorium or individually?
Yeah, individual.
Because the printing presses of the time couldn't handle this?
I think the main reason why they weren't printed before the late 19th century was because people kind of understood that this was a genre that was not meant for widespread distribution. This is a still rather esoteric artifact, whatever you do, and especially once you get to the Lurianic ones with these maybe potentially problematic anthropomorphisms, you see why there might be some reticence to print them. In 1864, in Warsaw, a publisher printed a paper scroll version of an Ilan that they called Ilan Hagadol. They attributed it to paupers, even though really only a portion of it was could be attributed properly to Paupers himself. And that looks just like, it looks, let's just say, sorry. It looks a lot like probably should be kissing all of these. Okay. Kisses to all of you. This, is, there's a lot. This is very similar to what was printed, engraved and printed in Warsaw in 1863. But what I call Great Trees is a kind of homage to that printing are Lurianic Ilanot that splice together multiple Lurianic Ilanot, each of which was originally in an independent Ilan. So in this case, for example, these four figures were originally created separately and were added as a kind of introduction to the Ilan because they depict a process called the Malbush that's only in Sarukian Lurianic Kabbalah, not in Vitalian Lurianic Kabbalah. Then you have these two frames are from Paupers. Then you have this frame, which is a Zakuto's diagram of Arich Anpin. Then you have Tzemach's Ilan Apartzufim. And then it goes back to more Paupers again. So this is a modular Ilan, and that's what they did. This is the kind of Ilan that was printed in Warsaw in 1864 as the Ilan Gadol Shel Rabbi Meir Popers. In 1893, it was reissued in the second edition that was completely bowdlerized. They took out anything that was graphically representational, even down to geometric figures. The only thing that they left in that had any kind of pictorial quality other than the words themselves were the trees of Tzemach's Ilan. But otherwise there's the head of Adam Kadmon, but there's no circle and there's no indication of outlines of ears or outline of the nose or mouth as was normally depicted. And the printer said, we believe that for all of the reasons that should be obvious to you, dear reader, it was best to reissue this Ilan without any of those graphical features. Hi, Avram. So now we have Avram, and we have two people who are in the book. Even I'm not in the book. You guys are in the book. I have maybe a hand shot somewhere, but that's as close as I got. So nice of you to come. This is another person who's making work. I don't need to introduce anyone in the room, I'm sure, to Avram, but work that seemed to me to still be possible to talk about as part of a lineage that goes back to the 14th century and these graphical visualizations of the divine. Maybe this was a good place to just kind of segue to your Seder or take some questions.
Let's enjoy some good wine and some Bishvat fruits and some
Yes, let's go downstairs. Thank you.
Downstairs is just around.
Okay, so we're gonna go to start the Tu Bishvat Seder. So I'll join soon. I'm gonna leave this and then we're gonna join soon for the Tu Bishvat Seder.